low ambient tone, the hum of a ship at sea, distant creak of timber. The last European to see them alive was a whaling captain named Robert Martin. His ship, the Prince of Wales, was working the rich waters off the coast of Baffin Island in late July of 1845. The air was cold, sharp with the scent of salt and ice, even in high summer. The light was perpetual, a low sun that never truly set, casting long distorted shadows across the pack ice. It was in that strange, endless twilight that Captain Martin watched two vessels materialize from the northern haze. They were unlike any whaler or merchantman. HMS Erebus and HMS Terror were bomb vessels, built to withstand the recoil of mortars, their hulls reinforced with iron plate and beams of English oak. Painted a stark, funereal black, they moved with a heavy, purposeful grace through the loose ice. Their sails were full, catching a wind that did not reach Martin's own ship. He noted their clean lines, the orderly activity on deck, the absolute absence of any signal of distress. They were, in that moment, the pinnacle of British naval ambition, a floating statement of confidence carved from timber and iron. Martin watched them for perhaps an hour. He saw them navigate a lead, a narrow channel of open water between two great sculpted plains of ice. The fog, a common companion in those latitudes, began to gather. It did not roll in like a storm. It thickened from the air itself, a gradual bleaching of the world. First, the distant icebergs softened into ghosts. Then the stark black line of the Terror's hull began to blur at the edges. The details went first, the individual figures on deck, the intricate rigging against the sky. Then the shapes themselves began to dissolve into the universal gray. The last Martin saw was the faint, pale suggestion of their topsails, like smudges of chalk on a slate. Then nothing. The curtain of fog closed completely. The Arctic, vast and indifferent, resumed its silent watch. Captain Martin made his entry in the Prince of Wales log. He noted the coordinates, the time, the bearing. It was a routine notation. He had no reason to believe he was recording a historical vanishing. He expected, as did all of England, to read of their glorious success in the papers within the year. Back in London, the Admiralty's charts were marked with optimistic, sweeping lines. The lords of the sea planned victory banquets in their minds. The expedition carried 3 years' worth of provisions in tinned cans, a library of 1,200 books, fine china, and silver cutlery engraved with the officers' family crests. They were prepared for a sojourn, not a disappearance. The official correspondence from that summer breathes with a breezy, unshakable certainty. The passage was as good as found. Franklin and his men were heroes in waiting, their return a mere formality. But in that moment on the Prince of Wales, watching the gray silence swallow those two black shapes, Captain Martin might have felt a chill that had little to do with the Arctic air. It is a human feeling, one that transcends centuries. That moment when you lose sight of someone in a crowd, and the creeping doubt that maybe you won't find them again. A primal recognition that the world is larger than our plans, and that some doors once closed do not reopen. He turned from the rail. He attended to his ship, and HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, with their 129 souls, passed from the known world into the realm of story, leaving behind only the echo of their orders and the deafening silence of the ice. Sod of the ship's creaks fade, replaced by a lower, colder, sustained tone, the sound of empty horizons. Sustained low tone, the creak of timber now replaced by a deeper, more resonant groan, the sound of ice pressing against wood. That deafening silence did not last. Aboard the ships, it was replaced by the routine noise of survival. For nearly 2 years that routine held. The ice that had captured them was not a sudden prison, but a gradual embrace. It allowed them the grim comfort of procedure. The logs from that first wintering are meticulous, dull with the minutiae of sledging parties, scientific observations, and the maintenance of discipline. They believed they were waiting. The true vanishing did not begin with the fog in Baffin Bay. It began with a single line in a ledger, in the perpetual twilight of a different winter. Aboard HMS Terror in the captain's great cabin converted to a surgeon's domain, Dr. John Smart recorded the event. The date was January 6, 1847. The air in the cabin was still thick with the smell of lamp oil and cold brine. Outside, the world was a monochrome of blue shadow and white expanse. The ships canted at strange angles in the grip of the ice. The only sounds were the groan of the hull and the scratch of his pen. He wrote with the economy of his profession. Departed this life, Lieutenant Graham Gore. Interred at 2 p.m. on the island. No cause was given. It was simply the first debit in a ledger that would soon be overwhelmed. Gore was an experienced officer, a veteran of Arctic service. His death was not part of the plan. The burial party would have labored in the profound cold, their breath pluming in the still air as they chipped at the iron-hard ground. They laid him in the permafrost, a permanent part of the landscape they had come to conquer. The ceremony was brief, the words from the Book of Common Prayer snatched away by the wind. When they returned to the ship, they brought the cold back with them in their clothes and in their bones. That logbook entry is the last official word we have from the expedition's leadership. After this, the record fractures. The neat, confident hand of naval authority gives way to silence, and then to other more desperate forms of testimony. But in that moment, as Dr. Smart sanded the ink and closed the log, the feeling aboard must have shifted. It is a modern feeling, too. The first time you realize a plan is going seriously wrong, that quiet, cold feeling in your stomach. It is not panic, but a recalibration. The horizon of expectation shrinks. The future is no longer a triumphant return through the passage, but the simple, pressing question of the next sunrise, the next meal, the next name in the surgeon's ledger. Lieutenant Gore was not lost to the ice. He was committed to it, and in that commitment, the expedition's purpose began its slow, irrevocable change. They were no longer explorers waiting to proceed. They were men in a wooden world beginning to count their losses. The groaning of the ice grows subtly, a deep, tectonic pressure. The groaning of the ice was a permanent sound now, a bass note to the years that followed. The ledger Dr. Smart closed did not stay closed. Other names were added, in that same economical hand until the hand itself stopped. The ships, Erebus and Terror, remained fixed in their icy cradle, their stores dwindling, their crews thinning. The plan had fully dissolved. What remained was the arithmetic of survival, and then the silence. That silence from the ships was total. In London, the Admiralty's concern curdled into dread, then into a series of search expeditions that swept the Arctic archipelago like probing fingers, finding nothing. The official record was a void, but the Arctic is not empty, and it keeps its own accounts. The story shifts south to a place the Royal Navy charts called Repulse Bay. It is spring, 1854. The ice is softening at its edges. The light has returned, a glaring, unforgiving white that reflects off the snow and the sea. Here, the hunter Inuit Pujijuk is moving along the coast. His world is one of immediate practical truths: the seal's breathing hole, the caribou's track, the direction of the wind. His testimony, given years later to the explorer John Ray, would become a document of a different kind. On this day, his eye catches a movement that does not belong, a figure stumbling along the tide crack. It is a kabluna, a white man, but unlike any he has seen or heard of in stories, the man's face is gaunt, stretched tight over bone, his eyes set deep in shadow. His uniform, once a proud navy blue, hangs in frozen tatters from his shoulders. He moves with the slow, precarious care of extreme exhaustion, of someone whose every step is a calculated risk against collapse. Inuit Pujijuk approaches. There is no shared language, only the universal grammar of need. The white man produces something from his ragged coat. It is a spoon, made of solid silver. The handle is worked with an intricate design, a flourish from a world of orderly mess decks and officers' dinners. It catches the weak spring sun. He offers it. The trade is made. Seal meat, life itself, for this cold, elegant artifact. The transaction is silent. The hunter watches as the man takes the meat and turns, vanishing back into the white landscape from which he came, a specter swallowed by the glare. This encounter is a fracture in the official silence. It is not a naval log. It is a story passed from Inuit Pujijuk to John Ray, from Ray to the Admiralty, where it would be met with skepticism and distaste. But it is a primary source, etched in memory and necessity. It tells us that at least one man, in the spring of 1854, was alive and moving south, years after the ships were abandoned. He was beyond the reach of his captains, his surgeons, his ledgers. He was down to trading the very symbols of his civilization for another day of life. Hearing this story feels familiar. It is like hearing a second-hand story about a friend in trouble. The details are fuzzy, relayed through someone else, but the core image it creates is immediate and real. The worry it sparks is not about precise coordinates or timelines, but about the sheer, visceral fact of the stumble. The tattered uniform, the desperate trade. It confirms a fear without providing the solace of an ending. The hunter continued on his way. The man in blue continued on his. One returned to a community, to a fire, to a story that would be told and retold. The other walked into the white, carrying his piece of seal meat, a spark of life rekindled by a silver spoon left behind in the snow. He was proof, after the ice, after the ships, after the final log entry, there were still men alive. They were no longer a Royal Navy expedition. They were ghosts. Ghosts in search of a body, a story in search of a document. The proof offered by Inuit Pujijuk was human, fleeting, and for the Admiralty, uncomfortably anecdotal. They required something harder. They would get it, but not in the form they expected. The search expeditions continued, a slow combing of the labyrinth. It was May of 1859, 14 years after the ships had vanished into the fog off Baffin Bay. Lieutenant William Hobson of HMS Fox, his fingers clumsy and numb within his mittens, was investigating a low ridge of stones on the northwest coast of King William Island, a cairn. It was a common enough sight. Explorers left them as markers, like breadcrumbs in a vast white forest. But this one, at a place called Victory Point, felt different. The wind here was a physical thing, a scalpel of ice that pared away all warmth. Hobson's men worked at the frozen rocks, their breath pluming in the relentless gray light. Inside they found a rusted cylinder, and inside that a single sheet of paper. Hobson unfolded it carefully, the wind threatening to snatch it from his grasp. The message was written in two distinct hands, the ink bleached by time but still legible against the official Admiralty form. The first entry was dated May 28, 1847. It was succinct, professional, and utterly normal. Sir John Franklin commanding. All well. The second note was scribbled around the margins of that same form, a year later. April 25, 1828, the handwriting was different, that of Captain Fitzjames. It stated that Sir John Franklin had died on June 11, 1847, that the ships had been trapped in ice for 19 months, and that on the 22nd of April they had been abandoned. The surviving 105 souls, it said, were landing here and starting tomorrow for Back's Fish River. Hobson stood in that biting wind, holding the only official record to ever emerge from the expedition. It confirmed the disaster but explained nothing. Why abandon the ships here with hundreds of miles of barren coast between them and any known outpost? Where, precisely, were they going? The note was a door slammed shut on one mystery, the fate of the vessels, only to swing open onto a darker, more chaotic one, the fate of the men. Finding this note feels like finding an old cryptic letter in a forgotten drawer. It explains something, but not everything, and the mystery deepens. The paper gave numbers, dates, a direction, but it said nothing of the conditions inside those ice-locked ships in the months leading to that decision. It said nothing of the silence that must have fallen between the first, confident all well, and the desperate marginalia of the second. It was a snapshot of a moment of catastrophic decision, frozen as perfectly as the ships themselves. The expedition was no longer missing. It was fractured, on the move, and heading into a blank space on the map with a number 105 that would soon begin to dwindle, not in a surgeon's ledger, but on the stones and ice of a terrible shore. The note from Victory Point was a fixed point in the narrative. 105 men heading south. For over a century, that was the story. A tragic march toward a distant river, ending in quiet oblivion. The Victorian public could understand exhaustion. They could comprehend the cold, but the full truth scattered across King William Island in fragments of bone and whispered testimony was a story they were never meant to hear. It would take the tools of another century to force that story into the light. The scene shifts from wind-scoured stone to the sterile glow of fluorescent lights. A laboratory in Ontario, the 1990s, a forensic anthropologist turns a human femur under a bright lamp. This bone was recovered from the island, one of dozens. It is bleached, fragile, a relic of the 105. The scientist's eye is not looking for cause of death, but for a story of survival, and the bone tells it. Etched into the cortical surface are a series of fine, parallel lines. They are not the random scoring of animal teeth or the crude chops of a tool-breaking bone for marrow. These are precise, linear cut marks. The pattern is unmistakable, the signature of a knife blade being drawn, repeatedly and with controlled pressure across the bone to clean it of every last shred of tissue. This is not evidence of starvation. This is evidence of systematic butchery. The laboratory is silent, save for the hum of the lights. Here, in this clean, modern room, the final Victorian veil is torn away. The Inuit testimony, stories of men with hollow eyes cutting meat from bodies on the ice, stories dismissed for generations as savage misunderstanding or morbid fancy, is no longer anecdote. It is corroborated by the physical evidence. The bones have their say, and they confirm a horror the Admiralty's official silence was designed to bury. Seeing clear proof of something you suspected but hoped wasn't true, that moment of grim confirmation. The scientist in the lab experiences it, just as the historian piecing together the final desperate months must accept it. The march south was not merely a disciplined retreat. It was a descent into a chaos where the unthinkable became procedure. The cut marks are a ledger more terrible than any ship's log, recording not names or dates, but a single stark fact. When all other food was gone, they turned to what was left. The note in the cairn gave a number, 105. The bones on the island, with their meticulous, ghastly inscriptions, tell us what happened to that number. They tell us how it shrank. But the story does not end on the island. It returns to the sea, to the place where it began, for 160 years. The wrecks of Erebus and Terror were ghosts in the charts, their final resting place a blank space on the map. Then, in 2014 and 2016, the dark water gave them up. Sonar images resolved into timber, 2 ships sitting upright on the silent seabed, preserved in the perpetual cold and dark of the Arctic depths. A remote-operated camera descends, its light cutting a cone through the blackness. It glides over the deck of the HMS Erebus, sediment falling like eternal snow. It passes a capstan, a coiled hawser. It peers through a cabin window. Inside, a table is still set with plates. A boot lies on its side on the floorboards, as if the owner just stepped away for a moment and intended to return. The scene is a perfect, frozen tableau of interrupted life. It feels, in a way, peaceful. But that peace is an illusion. It is the stillness of a stopped clock, visiting an abandoned house where everything is left just as it was, the chair pushed back from the table, The cup still half full, it feels peaceful but also deeply unsettlingly wrong. You are looking at the moment before. The wreck is not a conclusion, it is a long-held breath. The ships are found, but they give up no new secrets about the final days. The waterlogged logs are indecipherable pulp. The preserved interiors speak only of the moment of abandonment, not of the horrors that transpired in the years of imprisonment within the ice, nor of the desperation that followed on the march south. The ships are silent witnesses that refuse to testify. They offer context, not confession. We see the sturdy hulls that defied the ice for so long. We see the stocked shelves, the personal effects, the ghostly order of it all. It makes the chaos that came after, the scattered bones, the knife-marked ledgers, even more profound. Here was the fortress of civilization, with its china plates and its libraries. And there, on the white desert, was what happened when that fortress's walls finally crumbled. The camera turns, stirring sediment. For a second, the view clouds. Then it clears, looking out from the deck, across the barren seabed and into the endless dark. This is the final view. Not a cairn on a stony shore, but the silent, waiting emptiness into which those 105 men walked, carrying with them the unthinkable weight of their last resort. The ships, reclaimed by the sea, hold their peace. The bones, scattered on the land, have told the rest.